Well, hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a very special, basically, live stream of Let Us Reason. This is our new series entitled, or I titled it, I should say, Books and Authors. And you're in for a real treat today. We have with us a dear brother in the Lord and someone that I came to know at even a very deeper level, professionally speaking. And, I was fascinated by his knowledge, his expertise in the field of Islam and apologetics, and also many of the writings and the books that he has published, and even others that he's still working on. So for that reason, I invited our dear brother, Dr. Daniel Janasik, and I asked him if he can join us in this new series that I'm doing so that we can showcase and highlight not only his work, but also at least one of his books, with the hope that you will be exposed as viewers to the other writings that he has done. And I hope to bring him back again to talk about another fascinating book that he did based on his PhD dissertation. And before I introduce him formally, Dr. Janasik, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I know you're busy, and I know you just got off work probably just within an hour or two. So thank you so much for making time to be here.
Well, thank you, Fadi. I really appreciate being a part of this and having a chance to talk about this book, because I feel that it is something that all Christians need to know in order to reach Muslims with the truth and love.
Amen. Amen.
So, thank you.
Absolutely. Let me give people just a quick background or a brief bio about you, and then you can add more to that. So Dr. Janasik, by the way, received his PhD in the field of historical theology and apologetics, that's why we connected, because by the way, he, myself, and Jay are becoming best friends. So Jay Smith, of course, is connected with Dr. Janasik, and he received it from a very reputable school, London School of Theology. So we're not talking just any school here. And his dissertation focus was on John of Damascus, first apologist to the Muslims. And by the way, folks, if you don't know anything about John of Damascus, I highly encourage you to do a quick research on his writing. His own writing has been translated into English. You can find it online. But later on, this is the book that I wanted to ask Dr. Janasik next time to come in and talk just about his book that was based on this dissertation. And you'll find John of Damascus to be a very interesting apologist that stood up against the rise of Islam, apologetically speaking and theologically speaking. But at the same time, he is fascinating apologist. In my view, he was bold, and he definitely did not hold back thoughts about Islam and the Prophet of Islam. All that to say is that we are blessed to have a specialist in that area, someone that I consider to be an authority when it comes to John of Damascus. Dr. Janasik also received his undergraduate degree from the College of William and Mary, and his both MDiv and MA in Islamic Studies from CIU, standing for Columbia International University, another reputable university. He is an adjunct professor of apologetics and Islamic Studies at Southern Evangelical Seminary and also Columbia International University. And he taught biology and apologetics, that's interesting, for over 20 years. My pastor is a scientist too, so it always fascinates me. So he taught this for over 20 years and done extensive research and teachings in the area of major world religions and cults, the creation evolution. That's where biology folks will become handy, and the controversy surrounding that, of course, and more recently in the field of Islamic studies. He has written, by the way, 2 books. One we will be showcasing right now, and the other one is called John of Damascus, First Apologist to the Muslims. And the one we will be discussing today is A Christian's Guide to Islam, or The Guide to Answering Islam, if you wish, as a number of articles in these areas have been published by him. With that in mind, Dr. Janasik, again, formally, thank you so much for being here, and I want to welcome you to this show. Please fill in any other gaps that I may have missed about your background. And I'm fascinated about this. what got you interested in Islam and specifically apologetics, which is a very messy field?
Well, thank you again, Al. It's really good to be here. Yeah, the final title of the book was The Guide to Answering Islam. Originally, it was The Christian's Guide. It is a Christian's guide to Islam, everything a Christian needs to know about Islam and reaching out to Muslims. I got into apologetics when I was a missionary in Japan because I wanted to give answers to the people who were asking me these questions. And I found a lot of good apologetic books, and I was really interested in all the cults and world religions, and that's where I started dealing with apologetics there. And as I worked through that, I realized that even though I loved working with Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and other cultists, they were still relatively small in the world as far as population. And we had at that time well over a billion, 1.2 billion Muslims in the 90s. And I thought, I really need to know more about Islam. I was teaching it in my world religions classes, but I knew that we would be dealing more and more with Muslims. And so I started researching at that time at CIU, where I'd already received an MDiv, and I was working on another master's to work toward a PhD. We had a former missionary come to the school and start an MA program, and he brought with him all his good friends who were excellent scholars in the field. And I feel like I got one of the best educations sitting under them because they were internationally known. And from there, I went to the London School of Theology, studied under Tony Lane and Peter Riddell being one of the best mentors in this field. And he is a specialist in dealing with Islam, and Al Fadi knows him well also. So it was that whole idea of wanting to reach out to as many as I could, and knowing that Islam was going to be a great factor with Christians, and we need to understand so that we can reach out.
Amen. Amen. Now, let's briefly talk about John of Damascus. Why John of Damascus in particular when it comes to the field of apologetics? There were other renowned Arab-speaking apologists like Abu Qurra, for instance, Theodore Abu Qurra, and others like that. What got you interested in John of Damascus?
Well, as a former biology teacher, I love evidence, and I wanted to get to the root of the origins of Islam because that still fascinates me, and that's what Dr. J. Smith and I are doing a lot on as far as teaching and researching. But John of Damascus lived right in the early stages. He was a Christian who was a tax collector, actually the main tax collector under the Umayyad Empire, under the very powerful caliph named Al-Malik. And so I was looking for somebody who could tell us what was going on from an observer's point of view. And he had written 2 treatises on Islam, the heresy of the Ishmaelites and the disputation between a Saracen and a Christian. Now, they were not called Muslims at that time. He was writing in the early 700s. He worked under Abd-al-Malik, who was the caliph from 685 to 705. So this is just a generation or so after Muhammad would have lived. It was during the time of the formation. And we'll talk a lot about that because the traditional stories from Islam do not capture the actual facts.
That is fascinating. That is absolutely fascinating because it's lining up now with the series we're doing with Jay, of course, and the others that Jay himself has been involved in about calling them Muslims. I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. But again, I don't want to jump ahead of this. We'll talk about it at a later time.
Yeah. So with this book, with researching John of Damascus, I was able to take his heresy, the Ishmaelites, where he is very open, very bold. At this time, he is a priest and a monk in a obscure or a faraway monastery, and he's writing in Greek, which most Muslims could not read. And he talked about Muhammad being a false prophet. talked about the books that the written work, which were different written works. He never mentioned the Quran, and this is in the early 700s. This is 100 years after the Quran was supposedly written down, and it's still piecemeal in his eyes and in his witness. So I used him as a primary witness, and he is supposedly the mentor for Theodore Al-Bakura that you mentioned, who came a little bit later, and really wrote a lot in Arabic. John wrote in Greek, though he knew Arabic. That was his background. John Monsieur would have been more appropriate.
Wonderful. This is really fascinating, especially what you mentioned about the Quran. As you know, I'm focusing my PhD studies on the Quran itself and early, actually, Quranic manuscripts. And to say that even at his time, he wasn't still impressed and calling it piecemeal, it speaks a lot about the transmission and the collation of that book into what we know today as the Quran. Again, I don't want to jump ahead of this. Maybe when we do the show on your dissertation itself, we can dig a little bit deeper. And in fact, I would suggest that, you know, if you're open for that idea, I bring you back again, you and Jay, and we explore it from the apologetic standpoint as well. So let's focus now on this book. Again, you said the title is the guide to answering Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why this book? What got you into writing a book like this?
I wanted to capture all the main apologetic issues. I wanted to deal with the historical view, the theological view, the cultural view, the radical Islamic view, and a number of ways of reaching out to Muslims, and also deal with all the big apologetic questions, the Trinity, the deity of Christ, the historicity of our Bible compared to the Quran. And so it's a book that covers everything. It's everything that a Christian needs to know about Islam, where it started, how it developed, what its theology was, what the people do today, what the different sects are, what they believe, why they believe it, why they chose jihad. What does jihad mean? What does ISIS do? How does ISIS fit in as a representative of Islam itself? What about this idea of God or Allah and Yahweh, the Christian God, being the same? Are they? There's a whole chapter on that. So it covers everything. I wanted to do this to present this material to Christians so that they would understand what Islam is about. And apologetics is all about understanding first. Understand what you believe, understand what they believe. And then to be able to defend what you believe as a Christian. And then the third thing would be to be able to refute the error. And so I do all three of these things in here. Help them understand everything about Islam that they need to know, how to defend what we believe as Christians, and how to refute the error, the questions that come up that Muslims bring that are hard questions. And we need to know the answers. We need to know where we go for the resources. And so this is kind of the culmination of what I want people to know about Islam. And I wrote it on a level that is very easy to get into. It's on a lay level, yet it's backed up by a lot of research, a lot of deep research, but I wanted to make it very readable. So it's a book that is for Christians primarily, and for Muslims secondarily, if they want to really understand what's going on with Islam from an outside view. I'm very when I go through when I deal with Islam, the religion, and I critique that. It's a religion. It's open to opinions and research, and it's got to be based on evidence. And if the evidence isn't there, it's got to be revealed. But with Muslims as people, I'm a missionary at heart, and I want to reach out to them with love and bring them home, bring them to Christ, bring them to the truth. And so I distinguish between Islam, the religion, which needs to be critiqued, needs to be looked at thoroughly, and look especially at the evidence, and then reaching out to Muslims as people and loving them and respecting them. And so I try to do that with all that I write and all that I teach.
Wonderful, brother. So you mentioned already, you know, the structure of the book itself, but maybe we can get a little bit deeper into there. So if we were to look at the first chapter, for instance, you called it Pre-Islamic Overview, Paganism, or Heretical Monotheism. What do you mean by that?
Well, in each of the chapters, I first take the Muslim view, the traditional view, and in their own words, their own writers, their own scholars, and I say, okay, this is what they believe. And then I look at the historical, archaeological, theological critique of that material. And then the third part is to show the implications of that material and how we can use it as Christians. And then the fourth part of each chapter would be, as Christians, to reach out with that material to witness to Muslims. So what I mean in this particular one, paganism or heretical monotheism, is that the Muslim view, the traditional view, is that before Muhammad came, the whole area was very pagan. Everything was very backwards. They would kill babies and so on. They would bury women, little girls alive, baby girls alive, and so on. It was a time of what they call Jahiliyyah, and that there wasn't a Christian or Jewish influence in the area, and it was just pagan. Whereas the information that we're finding is that it was very much influenced by Christian ideas, Jewish ideas, Zoroastrian ideas. You find them all through the Quran as they were picked up in very different ways, sometimes fragmentary ways, but these influences were already there. It wasn't a place of paganism so much. It was very religious. And we'll also find out that it probably did not take place in the Hijaz, where we know where Mecca is now, or Medina, but probably North Arabia. And that's another puzzle that needs to be worked out. And of course, in that area, you had a lot of Christian influence. You had a lot of heretical Christian influence, and kind of Christian views that were not, I would say, orthodox. They were unorthodox, not necessarily heretical, but they had a slightly different view of Christ, the nature of Christ, and so on. And but we'll get into that later. So paganism, it wasn't there. An unformed or developing monotheism, because they believed in one God, but this God was different from the Christian or Jewish God.
Okay. Now in chapter 2, another fascinating title, Muhammad, Final Prophet or Apocalyptic Preacher. I mean, what did you mean by the apocalyptic side of things? Are you thinking like the church in those days was thinking Islam possibly a punishment against the church and sign of end times? Or are you referring to something totally different?
Well, Muhammad is a fascinating subject for sure. And in my research, I believe that there was someone or some people who took this title, Muhammad. Muhammad comes from Ahmed, which means praise, and Mu, the one who is praised. So you have praised one or chosen one. And it could have been a reference actually to their view of Christ, because they did not believe that Christ was this early monotheism that I was talking about. Did not believe that Jesus was God himself, but a great prophet, the great prophet, and they may have been calling him the chosen one. And even at the time when Abdul Malik had the inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock, and it talks about Muhammad, it could have, in the eyes of some scholars, referred to Jesus as the Muhammad, the praised one, the chosen one. But there are also some early Christian or non-Muslim writings in the 7th century, middle 7th century, that refer to a prophet coming out of Arabia. and even there's a mention of Muhammad, and again, it may be referring to the praised one, or this prophet could have been someone who was leading this band. And Dr. Smith is looking at someone called Ilyas Kabisa, who is a fascinating figure. His nickname apparently was Muhammad. He was called the Chosen One, and he had a lot of these ideas. So that will come further. But as far as Muhammad being a final prophet, we have evidence that shows that the traditional Muhammad probably did not exist. The story is much different based on the evidence. And that's a great chapter in this whole, not only in the book, but the whole view of dealing with Islam. Muhammad is fascinating.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you for our moderators. And if you have any questions specific to Dr. Janasik and his work, please let us know. There's someone here by the name Cleana, I think it's a female, asking, can you refer for Muslims, or I think she's saying, can you refer Muslims to some historical evidence-based books that are not written by missionaries? I guess, you know, she's asking for secular sources, maybe. Are you aware of any?
Yes. There's one that has a lot of the different writings from this time, from the non-Muslims, and that's Robert Hoyland's book, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It. He knows about 15, 16 different languages, and he translated a lot of these early documents that spoke of this figure, Mahmet. And so that's a great source of reading primary source material, but there's a whole slew of other scholars that have dealt with this early material. Ibn Waraq has collected a lot of different authors that have dealt with the stories of the origins, the evidence that has come up. Dan Gibson deals with the Qiblas and the direction of prayer and how they changed, and how they many of them in the early years pointed to a place far 600 miles north of Mecca, of what we know of Mecca today, and that was a city named Petra, the center of the Nabatean kingdom. And in fact, with the evidence that we're finding, the Nabateans may have been the ones who developed a lot of what became Islam, and out of them came this intermediate monotheism. They were Arabs, and they gained a lot more power when the Byzantines moved out of the region and gave back or in their absence, the Arabs who were being paid by the Byzantines to guard the borderlands while they were in battle against the Persian forces for well over 100 years. These Arabs learned a lot from the Byzantines, and then when the Byzantines retreated back, the Arabs had open offering to the land before them, and they became the masters of those lands in a very short time.
Thank you. And Liliani, also, thank you so much for the super chat, super sticker. Wanted to ask you, brother, about chapter 3, is the one that is usually fascinating to me, the topic of the Quran. You title it Quran, Divine Authorship or Authored by Men. Which angle did you take? Did you take the historical angle? Did you take the apologetic angle? Did you try to show the tension between, what we know traditionally versus, evidentially, if you wish?
All of the above. Of course, I dealt with the traditional view, the idea that Muhammad gained this revelation over a 23-year period. It was then memorized by his followers, written down within 20 years of his death, and then that became the Uthmanic recension, and that was copied and passed around to the main cities. but we find that that is not at all what we have with the Quran. There are the earliest ones that we have, like the Topkapi or the Samarkand, are dated in the mid 8th century, well over 100 years later. And there are seemingly fragments of Quranic material or Quranic-like material that may even predate Muhammad. So how could he have gotten this material from revelation? By the way, even in the traditional view, all that revelation came from an angel. None of it came directly from Allah, but from an angel, Jibril or Gabriel. And remember, the Bible says that Paul warns us, even if an angel comes, this is in Galatians, even if an angel comes to us and gives us a message that is contrary to the gospel, may it be anathema, may he be cut off. So here was an angel who gave a very different story, denied the deity of Christ, denied the Trinity. So why, as Christians, should we be considering Islam as being another authority on matters of faith? They are diametrically opposed to what we as Christians believe. And from the very beginning, from the traditional story, if that's what happened, then it is contrary all the way. But the evidence shows that the Quran came over a slow period, probably developed well over 100, 150 years, even into the 8th century, late 8th century. And it was continually changed. Dr. Dan Brubaker has a book on the corrections of the Quran where he shows that there are manuscripts. The earliest manuscripts have places that have been erased, places that have been changed, places that have been taped over, and there are corrections made, almost like there's a sense like, okay, we finally know what we have. Here is what we want for the final Quran, but oh, that's an earlier one. It has to be corrected. It has the wrong words and so on. And that's what it seems like they did. They made these corrections, and then finally we've come up with a Quran that would be the same everywhere. But interestingly enough, that canonization takes us only back to 1924 with the Al-Azhar decision to use what was known as the Hafs Qiraat, or the Hafs version, to become standardized. And that's what you pull off the shelf. 95% of the Qurans that are in circulation would be from the Hafs version. But if you listen to Dr. Smith and Al-Fadi deal with the Qiraat situation, you know that there are a lot of Qiraats, different versions, floating around and being used. And that's a big obstacle for Muslims today, a big controversy. But the evidence shows that the Quran came slowly. It came from many sources, many non-Muslim sources. I mean, that's the fascinating part. You have stories and poetry that was written around the time or much earlier. Stories of the seven sleepers, the Greek story of seven sleepers in a cave that fell asleep, and it was a time of persecution before Constantine, and then they woke up. They were from Ephesus. They woke up in the cave 100 or so years later, and they sent somebody down for food, and he went into town. His money was no longer used because it was 100 years old, and there were Christians in the town. Christianity was legal. And so you have that story in the Quran. Why would that be there? You have a lot of stories from the Jewish commentaries that have been pulled in. You have some from Gnostic Gospels talking about Jesus talking from the cradle, Jesus performing the miracle of taking clay birds that he made and breathing on them, and then they fly away as live birds. That's not in Scripture. Those are things that are in these apocalyptic or Gnostic books. Why would they be in the Quran? The Quran it seems to be a compilation of many, many sources brought together by a group that wanted to have a holy book for their religion.
Yes, fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, of course. I mean, it's I can tell you folks that how timely this book is now in light of these discoveries related to early Quranic manuscripts, the contradictions between the traditional story of the rise of Islam and origin of Islam and the findings concerning Qibla, Petra, concerning even what Jay Smith have been talking about, all of the conundrums, and the list can go on and on and on. So a book like this could be a quick, basically, overview for you that could lead you into the deeper discussion if you're fascinated about this topic or that topic. For me, of course, I'm always fascinated about the Quran. You mentioned Dr. Daniel Brubaker, who is, by the way, someone that we both know and respect. His book that he publishes, 20 samples. It's about 100 pages, give or take. So far to date, there is more than 500 pages of responses to this tiny little book, man. I mean, I'm just telling you, and he has yet to scratch the surface. I mean, he was just publishing examples only of his finding. And I think the Islamic community is taking his work as if it's an attack on them, when in fact, he's just a scholar revealing findings, never said anything about this or that. And again, it's interesting, fascinating times, what we're seeing so far, how people can get irritated by findings that contradict their own traditional understanding of things, or whatever they feel comfortable with, rather than to, if you wish, irritate the wound, in this case, be an assault, right? So all that to say is I want to thank, of course, everyone here, and I want to encourage you to go and purchase a copy of this book. Again, the book is called, we're talking about Daniel's book here, Dr. Daniel Janosik's book, the other Daniel, which is this one, The Guide to Answering Islam. You will find it on Amazon, of course, folks, and I'm sure you can find it on other platforms. But it's a fascinating book. I have it myself in my library. And, of course, I'm a little bit, special. I got his autograph on it. But nevertheless.
Yeah, might get you a cup of coffee somewhere.
So, folks, I want to just tell everybody that I will be having a second live stream in a couple of hours from now. It will be at 10 p.m. New York time with Alex Blagojevich. We'll be talking about false gospels. Tomorrow, I'll have 2 live streams, almost back to back, with 2 people in Europe, in the UK. The first one will be with Bob the Builder, and that would be at 7 p.m. UK time, and then at 9 p.m. with the Daughter of Christ. So I'll be repeating this in a little bit. Okay, brother. Well, now we get to the next topic, which is the origin of Islam, and you're titling it "New Path to God" or a Jewish Christian heresy. I'm fascinated about this. I think John of Damascus is the one that was making such claim also. So tell us more about that.
Well, of course, according to the traditional view, Islam is a continuation of the Abrahamic faith. So you have the Jews, then the Christians, Jesus, and then Muhammad as the final prophet, giving the full rendition of Allah's words, because all these other prophets and religions have lost, according to them, the true words. They call our scriptures corrupted, because our scriptures do not mention Muhammad as the coming prophet, the final prophet. Our scriptures talk about Jesus coming back, and that's what we're waiting for as Christians. But the Muslims would see the Islam as the continuation, as the final answer to all these questions. But actually, the evidence shows that, as I said, it seems to come from a Jewish-Christian alliance. In fact, a number of the early raiders that came up, took over Jerusalem, and then Damascus. Jerusalem in 638. Damascus even before that, in 635. In fact, John's grandfather was the mayor of Damascus, a walled city. And when the Arabs came up, they were called Arabs still. They didn't really take on the name Muslims, or they were not written about as Muslims until about the middle of the 8th century, 741, I believe. But here we are, 635, and they're coming up against Damascus, and John's grandfather makes a treaty with them, and they let the people live. And then John's grandfather retains this commission as the chief tax collector. He passes it on to John's father, and then finally on to John himself in the time of Abd-al-Malik, about 690 to about for John, and then retiring probably in the 715 to 720. But the evidence shows that you had strong Jewish collaboration. In fact, you look at part of the Quran, what's called the Meccan Quran. There, you have the apocalyptic approach, and then the Medinan part has a lot of laws laid down. Well, they're very much fashioned after the Jewish legal system. And then you have the Christian heresies, the views that Jesus was not God himself, that God is not a Trinity, but yet, there are similarities, but great differences. And so it seems like an amalgamation. And even testimonies from that time, from non-Muslims, reveal that in these hoarding parties, these raids that came and took over the cities, there were a lot of Christians and Jews as part of the group, rather than just the Arabs. So it's an interesting story of a development over time, rather than something that came, 70 years before, 100 years before, all in Mecca, because as we have found, Mecca may not have been there at that time. Mecca may not have been a city, and if it did not exist at the time of Muhammad in the early 600s, then who was Muhammad and where did he come from? So that's the big question that we're researching now.
Absolutely. Again, everyone, we're talking to Dr. Daniel Janasik about a book that he published called The Guide to Answer in Islam, and we are going through a survey of the chapters. Hopefully we can cover all of them, but if we didn't, I encourage you, of course, to check this book out on Amazon. You can even click on the image and see the table of content, and you will follow along with what we're saying. But I encourage you to have a book like this in your library. In my view, it did touch on things that not a whole lot of people have yet to touch on in terms of their writings, which is some of the contradictions or tension between the traditional Islamic history and the new findings. We get to chapter 5, Dr. Janasik, and you said theological development of Islam. That's in and of itself is fascinating to me, to say that the theology of Islam is developing. So the opening of the gates of heaven or the closing of the Muslim mind. What say you?
Okay. Well, it's interesting because you have to separate the early start of Islam with the Arabs and the Umayyad Empire, which lasted up to about 750. And it was in tension with what became the Abbasid Empire, which was mostly from Persia. The Persians had a deep background in philosophy and theology. They were Zoroastrians beforehand, and the Arabs were more nomads, and the Arabs that fit into this scenario seem to have had that Christian Jewish heresy, and they didn't have much of a developed theology in the early stages. It was more in the Abbasid time that you had these theological arguments and conundrums being presented, and pretty detailed philosophical views, and it came more from a Persian viewpoint, and they dealt with works versus faith. They dealt with free will versus predestination. And then they had the big argument between whether the Quran was created or whether it was something that was eternal, all as eternal as Allah, which would make it a separate God in a sense. But these were the arguments that they were passing around in the late 8th century, 9th century especially. And that's when you had the Abbasid period, and that's when you had a lot of the influence from the Persians. But about the early 12th century, you had a Sufi, a former Sufi named Al-Ghazali, and he was their chief philosopher. And he came to the point of saying, this man-made philosophy is really incoherent. It does not make sense on a spiritual realm. And so he reversed himself. He had been a proponent of this philosophy idea. And then he reversed himself and he said, if it's not in the Quran, if it's not divinely inspired, then it's just incoherent and useless. And that became the final word on philosophy. So philosophy was chucked and only the Quran counted. And Robert Riley writes a very good book called The Closing of the Muslim Mind. And he highlights Al-Ghazali as the beginning of the end. And today, Muslims do not really like philosophy. They do not have a developed sense of dealing with these questions. And they're running into a lot of difficult times trying to validate what the Quran says without having access to these other arguments or being able to use them because they've been deemed incoherent and irrelevant. So that's where we can pick up as Christians and really help Muslims understand why these arguments are very important and why they lead to a better understanding of who God is and what he has given us in the way of philosophy and intellectual understanding through theology, a true theology. They have lost out on that because they have turned their minds away. They have closed their minds to these things.
Excellent. Now we get into the golden age, which, I can tell you as a former Muslim myself, you've always heard about, two things, the age of ignorance and then the golden age. Age of ignorance and then the golden age, and how Islam contributed to algebra and Islam contributed to, pharmaceutical science, and how Islam contributed to so many things. And yet, if you put things in perspective, you begin to discover that that's not exactly the case as being propagated, if you wish. So tell us more about this in terms of chapter 6 that you've titled Islamic Golden Age and Expansion, Path of Peace or Trail of Blood. And that's telling right there.
Yeah, because you have jihad all through that. You have a lot of conquering. And of course, they conquered Spain. And that's where they like to bring up the idea that, in Spain, you had this golden age. And there was a real peace between the conquering Muslims and the Jews and the Christians, that they were now their underlings under their control. But that wasn't the case at all. And one person who brings that up in a very good way is Dario Fernandez Morera, The Myth of the Andalusian Paradise.
Absolutely.
Because
I have that book. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. In fact, our dear friend, I don't know if you know him, Dr. Bill Warner, he's the one who pointed out to me that there is this myth about the Andalusia being the place, to go to and enjoy basically the advancements in all kind of things, science and math and other things through Islam. And I've been to southern Spain and you can see the architecture and everything, but I've always wondered why there only and not everywhere. Yet to come to find out that throughout this 708 years, there was a lot of conflicts taking place everywhere. But anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the Golden Age, not only in Persia or what we now know as Iran and Iraq, in basically the Abbasid period, 750 to 1257, that's where they talk about this Golden Age there. There were advancements in philosophy, art, math, science, medicine, but we find that they were great borrowers. Now, as I said before, the Persians were more tied to history, culture, deep background, and they had a lot of these things already with the medical world and philosophy. There were philosophers. And then you do have some interesting people who were renowned for their discoveries or their explanations. For example, in philosophy, Ibn Rushdi, Ibn Sina, Avicenna, they did commentaries on Aristotle, and very good work. They kind of reopened that, though they don't tell you that these works that were in Greek originally, of course, Aristotle, Plato, had been translated into Arabic, and then it was preserved in Arabic when a lot of these Greek manuscripts were lost. But the translation work was done by Christians, because Christians could do that. The Muslims didn't know Greek. And so they kind of preserved it in that way. But you do have these commentaries, and they're insightful. In the math world, you have Al-Khwarizmi, known for algebra. In that realm, you have the concept of the zero being demonstrated and the so-called Arabic numbers. But what we don't realize is that the concept of zero came from India, and it was discovered many years before that. And the Arabic numbers are really from India, and they are not Arabic. They are borrowed. They were great borrowers at this time. So whether it was science or medicine or trade, they were borrowing many things. And a lot of these prominent men who kind of put forth these ideas again were first generation Muslims. They had been brought up in the academic world of the West, and they knew these ideas from the West. So it's very interesting when you get underneath the covers of what was happening. Yes, there were some nice and great discoveries put forward, but they were mostly borrowed and rehashed even from Greek times, discovered centuries before. And then especially in Spain, you have that conflict underneath that is so well put together by this book. And so to understand the Golden Age, this is a book that is very helpful.
Thank you, brother. Again, if you have just joined us, and I see some of you have just joined, it depends where you're at, of course. It could be the difference in time that is permitting you to do so right now. We are interviewing Dr. Daniel Janasik, who is an author and an educator. His PhD focus was in the field of apologetics, focusing on John of Damascus, and we will interview him at a certain time in the future about that field in itself and that work, I should say. But today we're talking about one of his books entitled The Guide to Answering Islam, The Guide to Answering Islam. And if you are in front of a computer, go to Amazon right now and find the book. If you want to click also inside and see the table of content, but I encourage you to even purchase it right now. It's an amazing book, without a doubt. I have it myself. Eliab C, thank you so much for the super chat. We appreciate your sacrifices, folks. So with that in mind, we get into chapter 7, Islamic Doctrine 5 verses 3 equals 1. Are we talking about the 5 pillars here?
Yes, we're talking about the 5 pillars of Islam, the teachings of Islam, and then talking in contrast to the theology of the Trinity, one God, 3 persons, and how that fits with the idea of the monotheistic view of Allah being a solitary or a very strong monistic type of God. The Trinity cannot be understood. Muslims always make fun of the Trinity. How can you have 1 + 1 + 1 equal 1? Well, 1 × 1 × 1 equals 1. But I go into the depth of the difference, and it's I think I love the Trinity. I love dealing with that, and so this is a treatment of the Muslim pillars of faith, as well as a contrast with the core of Christianity. We believe in a triune God, a God who is in community, a God who is able to love because there's love within this diversity within the unity, and that is the Trinity. So I deal with that. Should go on more quickly with some of these other things and just highlight these chapters are within the theology and the cultural and the belief system of Islam, the second section. The next one is Sharia law. Sharia is so strong in Islam. I know, Al-Fadi, growing up in Saudi Arabia, you would have been confronted with that in many ways, still being strongly propagated. But here, what do I have? I have external laws or internal sanctification, because it talks about that struggle, the jihad, the internal one, which came later. I mean, even the hadith that mentions the internal jihad, the struggle within yourself, was not the original jihad. that was mentioned with Muhammad and his raids to gain the booty and the control. But I talk about Sharia. Creeping Sharia is what's problematic in America or the West, because Muslims will start off asking for, because they're in the minority and they'll try to abide by the laws, but they'll be asking for more and more, demanding more and more. And for example, if they are in a school, let's say, and they want to have a place to pray, then they will ask for that for equal treatment, and maybe at lunch or after school. But then, because of the way it has to be set up, that room that's set aside may just be for Muslims to use, and then they may ask for faucets to be placed because they have to wash up and so on. It's just the start. And I have a chart in the book developed by a former director of InterVarsity, and it shows the creep of the Sharia from the countries that have less than 1%, what will happen in those countries, what will be promoted by the Muslims, and then what happens when it goes up to 5% or 10%, what you find in France or coming close in Britain. There's a greater demand, there's a greater push in politics, and the Islamophobic laws are placed, and all those things come as the population rises, and that's what is dealt with in that particular chapter. That's chapter 8.
We're going to jump ahead in the interest of time, of course. Talk to me a little bit about the Crusades and also radical Islam. As you know, there is a contrast between the two, and you know our Muslim friends always accuse the Crusaders for being the cause of the most tragic thing ever against Islam, which is fascinating to me because the cause behind the Crusaders campaign anyway has to do with attacks by Muslims.
Yeah.
But I'll let you go ahead and elaborate a little bit on that. So chapters 13 and 14, if you wish, and then we'll close with the apologetics and evangelism. Sure,
that'd be good. Yeah, the Crusades are often brought up today. They were not such a big thing with the Muslims back in the 11th, 12th century. It was just a period of about 250 years of 6 or 7 major crusades. And started in 1095 when the Pope at that time, Innocent III, I believe, realized from the pressure that for 400 years the Muslims had been taking over the land. They took over all the Middle East. They took over, in the first 100 years, they took over half of the Christian lands. Now think about that. We're having this big to-do about Israel being there in the Middle East, and with a small place that's less than the size of New Jersey, and that's where they're concentrated. And the rest of Islam is far more extensive, and yet the Muslims took all that land. 50% of the land that had once belonged to Christians, and so there was kind of a wake-up call 400 years after, and this is where the Pope said, "Okay, we've got to do something. We've got to return and fight." Because they're still knocking on the doors. They were for centuries. They were the Barbary pirates. They were the ones who were taking land along the North Africa into Spain. They were trying to conquer France. It was just they were trying to take over the whole area, and they took slaves during that time. They took over 1 million European slaves. They would raid the cities along the coast, and they would take all these captives, a lot of the women for their sex slaves, and kill a lot of the men, and take the young children for servants, for slaves. And that's one reason that castles were built away from the coast. A lot of the coastal areas in Italy and so on were evacuated. They were left alone because of all the raids. They didn't want to become slaves, so they moved upwards into the country. It's a fascinating story when you look at it. It was not a pretty story. So finally the Pope said, and that's why countries like France and Italy and Spain started into the early Crusades, and they went to retake Jerusalem. The second factor was that There was a truce for centuries where Christian pilgrims, could go to Jerusalem and do their thing and do the sightseeing and their homage to the holy relics there. But then the Seljuk Turks were giving them a hard time, killing the Christians. And that was another offense that had to be rectified. And so the Crusades were launched in order to gain back Jerusalem and a passageway. That was the main intent. It was not to destroy Islam. And the Muslims themselves, at that time, when you read the histories, yes, they fought them, but that was kind of like a little problem over there in the Jerusalem area. They had bigger problems elsewhere.
Exactly. Do you want to talk briefly about ISIS or the ideology, if you wish?
Yeah, I have a chapter on ISIS, and I have mostly material from the Muslims who were part of ISIS. I use that because ISIS called itself True Islam. And we get this story today that Islam is a peaceful religion. Islam means peace. It doesn't mean peace. It means submission to Allah. And Muslims are people who submit as slaves to Allah. Peace is a different word. And surely you find with what ISIS was doing was not peaceful at all. They were doing horrendous things, but everything they did was based on the Quran. Everything they did was based on the example of Muhammad. So when they said that they were going back to the core of Islam, the core of the Quran, the core of the teachings of Muhammad, that is exactly what they were doing. And I have charts that show and match up. This is what Muhammad said. This is what ISIS was doing. This is what the Quran says. This is what ISIS was doing. And they made that very explicit in their dialogues with the West, with their magazine called The Beak. They had very well done articles that were very specific.
Yeah, they called it Dabiq in reference to a hadith that talks about a future war between Islam and the world, actually. Yeah. And I used to laugh when the CNN of the world announced that 69 coalition countries of Europe and other nations are attacking ISIS. And I'm like, you're adding fuel to the fire because they're getting excited about this. They think they're fulfilling actually the hadith. Yeah. You see, it shows that if you don't know theology, and in this case, the theology of Islam, you're nothing but an ignorant. But of course, who am I and who are you, Dr. Janasik? You don't speak Arabic, and I was never a Muslim. That's what our Muslim friends will say. So anyway.
Yeah. And then finally, the apologetic part is very important, because as Christians, we need to know what the arguments are. Why do we say that God is triune? Why do we say that Jesus is God himself? These are very much opposed by Muslims. They are core beliefs for Christianity. And as I said, Islam is diametrically opposed to Christianity. And they want to tear down Christianity. And so we need to be able to defend what we believe. And in that defense, we can give an explanation to Muslims and show them that what we believe makes much more sense. What we believe is much better supported by archaeology, by history, by the whole reference to evidence. The evidence is on our side. The evidence is not on the side of Muslims. The evidence is against the idea of Mecca being in place in the 7th century, early 7th century. The evidence is against Muhammad being a prophet that grew up there and taught from there. The evidence is against the religion of Islam being formed early and fully intact with the prophet, with the book, and with the command of Allah. It's very, very different, and we need to know those differences, and that's what this book seeks to point out. What Christians need to understand, and how we can defend what we believe, and how we can refute the error that is coming at us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Janasik. Of course, this interview did not do justice to the book itself. That's why I'm encouraging all of you here to please go and check it out, and even I encourage you to purchase it. By the way, I'm not getting anything out of this, so don't think I'm pushing it just because I'm getting a kickback or anything like that. But I think it's a book that is worth having simply because the author, Dr. Janasik, is someone who is passionate about the topic, who did his research very well, who is revealing to you things I very much doubt you're going to read in a lot of sources in the academic arena, simply because there is a lot of political correctness that go along in that particular field, because people are concerned also about their name and their tenure and their affiliations and so on and so forth. Not that Dr. Janasik is attacking anyone, not at all. I mean, he's just laying out findings, giving you sources to go and check out his work. And that's the kind of academic work that we need to promote and appreciate, especially in times like this. Dr. Janasik, thank you so much, of course, for taking the time to be with us and to do this. I highly encourage you to consider coming back, and blessing us to talk about your other book, which was based on your dissertation concerning John of Damascus. I think that one alone is going to be a fascinating show and a fascinating book in and of itself. And I want to thank, of course, everyone who was here with us. And I want to remind you that I'm having a second live stream today at 10 p.m. New York time with Alex Blagojevich. Many of you know Alex already. And we're going to be continuing our talk about the false gospels and, how we can spot those different gospels. Tomorrow, I'm going to have 2 live streams with 2 different people in Europe, in the UK. First one with Bob the Builder at 7 p.m. UK time. And the second one with Daughter of Christ at 9 p.m. UK time. We'll announce those, of course, very soon. Brother, any last words you want to share with our viewers, not just about the book, but in general concerning Muslims?
As a Christian, I want to seek the truth. I want to know the truth. I believe that Jesus Christ and the gospel of Christ is the truth. And I look around and I see 1.6 billion Muslims who are desirous of knowing God, the true God. They're desirous of knowing the truth, but they are led astray. And so my heart goes out to them. I want to bring them home to Christ. I want them to know the truth, because the truth, the real truth, will set them free. And Jesus Christ said that he is the way, he is the truth, and he is the life. Everyone needs to know that, especially Muslims. And this book was written so that Christians can know what to do, and that Muslims will understand better what their religion really is about, how it started, what the theology is, and what is problematic about it.
Amen, brother. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, again, for being here with us. Once again, I really make my appeal to you to go and consider looking at this book, the Guide to Answering Islam, and Dr. Janasik is going to show you the cover right here. This is how it looks when you go to Amazon. It's priced reasonably, and I encourage you to consider having this. Is it available by any chance as an ebook, by the way?
It is a Kindle book. So it is a little bit cheaper as a Kindle book, and then you have the digital format.
Very good. Very good. That's even more helpful. Dr. Janasik, are you working on any other book right now? If you want to make mention of that, if you are at liberty, of course.
I am working on pieces, yes, but I'll hold on to that for the time being. But
yeah, I understand. Just want to make sure if there's something that is close to being published, we want to promote it for you as well. And certainly, whenever you publish anything, let us know, whether articles or books. We would love to be a platform for you, in addition to other platforms as well.
If people go to my website, which is just my name, danieljanasik.com, there are a list of articles and different videos that I put forth. And so that would be a good place for more material, danieljanasik.com.
Wonderful. Again, hopefully the moderators will post this. Send me the link, the exact link, so I can post it for you in the description box. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. Thank you to our moderators. I encourage you, of course, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, CIRA International. And if the Lord puts in your heart to become a Patreon patron, please do so. We have a campaign of raising 10 patrons per month. And we would love really to see more and more troops to join us and to widen our platforms to spread the knowledge about authors like Dr. Janasik, books like this, topics that we talk about, myself and my guests, and the other things that we do. I want to also basically draw your attention to a new series that have been basically produced here at our channel, CIRA International, recently. It's called Q&A with Al Fadi and Sam Shamoun, and we will be doing more and more of this on a weekly basis. In fact, the next one will be within a couple of days from now. Yesterday we had a long one, 2 hours, but it was a blessing. It's a late nighter for us, but we want to cater to the other side of the world, to the Australia of the world, and then New Zealand, and also Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, because we want our viewers over there to have a chance to interact with us as well. This is, again, our live stream. The series that we are showcasing here is called Books and Authors, and we will have a playlist now because we have a number of those already, and we would like for you to go and watch those and begin to spread the knowledge about these books and these authors. Thank you, Dr. Janasik, for your time. We appreciate you. Oh, by the way, well, I'll be remiss if we don't mention about VIU. Would you like to mention anything about that?
Yes, an exciting thing has happened at Veritas International University, or Veritas Seminary. Dr. Smith and I are co-directors of a program, a master's in apologetics and polemics against or dealing with Islam. And this is a new program. Dr. Smith is in the midst of a course right now on the origins of Islam, and it is really exciting.
We're talking Jay Smith here because they don't know him with this professional, high-ranking title. They know him as Jay.
Jay Smith. Okay, and then we're going to have a very special addition to our team coming up in March 23rd, dealing with the beliefs of Islam, and that'll be Al Fadi. Professor Al Fadi will be among our teachers, and Dr. Smith and I will do a separate one on Muhammad. They are 7-week courses. They're all online. You can join for credit for the masters, or you can become an audit student for a lesser price, and you will get all the lectures and the materials and have advantages in that way if you audit the course. So it's an exciting time. We've got a lot of great students who are coming in, and so just go to veritas.edu, find out where the registration is, and you can join us. There is a schedule. You can ask Al Fadi for a brochure that will list all the courses and the times and so on. But exciting venture. We're really getting into cutting edge material.
Yeah, and I will be also advertising it with Dr. Jay Smith, and hopefully you can join us at some point, to also advertise about this program, because we want to promote it. Again, it's in the field of Islamic apologetics. Not a whole lot of places, by the way, offer something like this. You can count them on one hand. We have, from what I heard from you and Dr. Jay Smith, highly qualified professors who are specialized in this field, and rarely that you find many of those specialists in one location. So my hope is that we will be able to promote this more and more students will join. I think Dr. Smith mentioned to me recently that he has more than 40 students from all over the world registered for his course alone.
Yeah, it's very interesting when we have the lectures, live lectures, and we have people who are watching it in the middle of the night where they are. But we have great discussions, great information, and that'll be the same for the other courses as well. So Professor Al Fadi will do a great job with the beliefs and practices, and that comes up in March 23rd. So that's coming up soon. So check in on that, and it will be a blessing. Oh, and Dr. Daniel Brubaker will probably be teaching on the Quran this summer, and we've got more in store in the fall. So it's a complete program in many ways.
Absolutely fascinating. I think people will be blessed just by, even if they consider, we want you to have a degree, folks, but if you want to consider at least popping in as an audit for the first time and get a feel of that, I think you will realize immediately the depth of information that you are going to accumulate in such a short period of time. So we encourage you to explore that at veritas basically .edu. That's V as in Victor, E as in Elephant, R as in Romeo, I as in Illustrate, T as in Tom, A as in Apple, S as in Sam .edu, and you will be able to benefit a lot from this. Thank you, Dr. Janasik. Thank you to our moderators. Thank you for those who gave through the super chat and super stickers, and for all of you as viewers for taking the time to be here with us. I will be back again in about 5 hours from now with Alex Blagojevich. It will be really late for him, but I don't care. He can drink some coffee and stay up. All that to say is that we miss you guys. That's why we do these shows all the time. This is Al Fadi, over and out. And yes, I did take this from Jay, but he can sue me also. Take care. God bless.